All right, welcome everyone to the journey again. We have another awesome testimony here today. My friend Tammy, who I've known for a number of years, in a number of different relationships we have in common. And she has a powerful testimony and also a very unique testimony in that she got clean and sober when she was a very young age, which is very difficult, especially nowadays with all the peer pressure and expectations and all that. So Tammy, thank you again for having the courage and transparency of sharing your story, knowing that somebody out there is going to hear this, it's going to help them. So thanks again for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Tracy. And, it's always a blessing to be able to share my testimony and story with others. I got clean at the age of 16 and a half. My clean date is February 19th of 1987. Actually, I was less than 16 and a half years old. So I was very blessed to be introduced to a 12-step fellowship, and more importantly, some people that just unconditionally loved me. I was born to a mother who suffered from schizophrenia and who had run off with my father after meeting him at a party. He was a Vietnam War veteran. He did 2 tours in Vietnam as a very proud Marine, and had just come back to the States and had been stationed at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. He did suffer from addiction, and by the time I was 6 months old, my mom was stranded in Detroit in not so pleasant living conditions with a 6 months old baby, and her mental illness was really starting to manifest. During that time, a specific religious group came knocking on the door, and she was introduced to this cult-like religion. And I essentially lived with my mom for 10 years, the first 10 years of my life, with her mental illness, which at that point was very severe, and a lot of confusion that I was taught about God and spirituality. And of course, that was enmeshed with a lot of trauma, a lot of physical abuse and mental abuse by my mom. I was also sexually abused at the age of 5 for the first time by an elder within the congregation of this religion, and lived in a very rough neighborhood, and had to learn how to literally survive, mostly taking care of myself pretty early on. My mom's capability to care for me was limited, let alone doing grocery shopping or, cooking or doing laundry. I also learned very early on how to adapt and survive under those conditions, and protect her. We would be out in public and she would laugh. God knows what was going through her head or what she was hearing. And I would laugh with her. That was still my mom, and I loved her, and that she was all that I knew. I was very isolated. We didn't celebrate any holidays, birthdays. I wasn't allowed to engage with a lot of other children outside of school. So I learned to be very creative and, again, just really survive with what I had to work with. I was taken away from her in a dramatic fashion one evening, actually the night before I was going to start 5th grade. I lived with my grandparents for a while. My grandfather was a really awfully wonderful man, but severe, angry alcoholic. That did not last long, and I ended up in and out of foster homes. During this time, I began using. I actually started using, it was easy to get a variety of substances, including alcohol, even at the age of 9 in the neighborhood that I lived in. A lot of drugs, a lot of drug dealers, a lot of stuff happening. And again, growing up in that lifestyle and that environment, that was just normal. I will say that there were some women within my neighborhood, a lot of moms who were addicted, however, would kind of take me under their wing, and there was an expression of love, whether it was feeding me or asking about the new bruises, or just doing the best that they could. And that was the first time I really experienced, I think, real unconditional love. I continued using, and my addiction progressed very rapidly between the ages of 12 and 16. And I choose not to focus on a whole lot of substances, because I think the disease as a whole is more important. The substances are a symptom, I've learned, of a much, deeper issue. And, our disease affects us spiritually, physically, and emotionally. And I was depleted of all of those basic needs, and getting fed good, healthy stuff at a very young age. There were some other, an incident of rape. And I was also, right at the time that I was getting clean, I was actually being sexually abused by my aunt's husband within our home. And that had been going on even before I had moved in with them, and they became my foster parents. For me, that was all normal. And I had convoluted that. There was a lot of exchange for, I'll get you high if you do this. I had to work through a lot of that over the years in healing and in therapy. The day before I got clean was kind of an interesting story for me, or moment for me, in that my addiction kind of got me to getting help. I had gotten really high with a friend one day, shared with her what was going on in my life and within my home, and decided to go into school. At that point, I had trespassed like the first 70 of 91 days of school. I mean, I trespassed, I was truant. I mean, it was awful. I barely showed up. I did go into the school and shared with them what was occurring in my home, and essentially all hell broke loose pretty quickly. My uncle was arrested that evening. My social worker showed up, and it was evident at that point that I had a substance abuse issue that was pretty serious. At that point, I was doing cocaine, snorting heroin. That's kind of where my addiction led to by the age of 16 on a daily basis, and doing whatever I needed to do to get high. I ended up in a 30-day treatment facility in Leesburg, Virginia. I grew up in the DC, Northern Virginia area. And during that time, of course, there was this whole court case going on. I was very angry. I did not participate at all, didn't communicate with staff. I wouldn't say I was, hostile, just rebellious and not real open to much of anything. And underneath all of that, I was scared. Regardless of the abuse, that was all that I had known. These were still the people that were my family. And taking that away from me, I didn't know where I was going to end up. Tremendous amount of fear. My relationship with any sort of concept of a higher power or God was non-existent. I remember at the age of 9 years old praying to him one night and saying, I'm not going to talk to you anymore because you're letting all of this bad stuff happen. Mm-hmm. And that was the last time that I had prayed until I was introduced to a 12-step fellowship. And I ended up in that 30-day treatment facility, and that didn't go well. Wasn't very cooperative. My social worker gave me, I had a couple of charges, one misdemeanor and one felony at that point as well. And she gave me a choice, being awarded the court. You could go to a long-term treatment facility for teenagers, residential, or you could go to juvie until you were 18. Of course, I chose the treatment center, especially when I heard that it wasn't a locked facility. So I had every intention of showing up, maybe getting a nice hot meal, a shower, and then I was going to be out of there. That was my plan. When I arrived there, I was introduced to a woman who God, I feel like, put in my life right when I needed love, unconditional love, and hope the most. And her name was Maureen, and she was actually a staff member there, about a year and a half older than I was. Very similar stories and histories, including the abuse. The connection that she made with me that first day is why I stayed each day thereafter. I didn't really buy into the fact that I was an addict. In fact, I had a year clean before I really examined more deeply, looking at me and admitting that I had a problem and that my life was unmanageable. I was very powerless over my addiction and that I needed to get help. And that was my first, really after over a year clean. What kept me staying was the unconditional love. You know, I'd sit in the 12-step meetings that we would go to, and I was introduced to, you know, with my little leather jacket on and, you know, kind of angry and sulking and scowling at people. And, you know, people would just kind of say, hey, you know, keep coming back. We love you. How are you doing today? You want a cup of coffee? You know, it'll get better, you know, hang in there. That's what kept me staying and helped me at least buy into not using just for that day. Out of the, I think it averaged about 21 people over the course of the 11 and a half months that I was in that residential facility. I'm the only one that stayed clean. There's one other gentleman who finally, after many years of relapsing, has now celebrated, I believe, 3 years clean just in the last month. I attended several funerals of some of the former residents in that facility. You know, for me, really, again, that connection early on and building relationships, you know, was it a challenge that I faced uniquely as a young person in recovery? You know, there were people that would, you know, say things like, you know, boy, almost kind of question whether I was an addict or not because I was as young as I was. You know, a little bit of those minimizing comments. And look, some of them are true. I am so grateful at the age of 49 that my life is what it is today. And I agree with some of those statements. Boy, I wish I'd got clean at your age. I'm blessed and so grateful that I was introduced and that I was willing and open. And for me, really, it was just a tiny little bit of hope, you know, through learning how to incorporate some spiritual principles that I learned in the 12-step fellowship that I attend and continue to be very involved in today. I slowly opened my mind up to the concept of a higher power that is loving and caring and greater than myself. And for a long time, it was just that simple. It took a number of years and a tremendous amount of healing and work to get to a place where I felt like I needed to further define who my higher power was for me in my life. And I also had to really do a lot of healing and undoing kind of on the brainwashing that was done as a young child about God and all of those convoluted messages. You know, the trauma, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the abandonment, you know, the neglect. It has taken quite a number of years and commitment to seeking outside help, you know, to really, really heal. And I continue with that today. You know, again, for me, I've learned that it's physical, spiritual, and emotional. And I have to really focus on all three of those to sustain my recovery today. My faith has grown tremendously over the last few years. And I continue to kind of cultivate my relationship with my higher power and who I choose to call God. And that's extremely important to me and really what has guided me in many of my decisions that I try to make on a daily basis. You know, the principles that I've learned through the 12-step fellowship have really allowed me to continue to not only examine and clean up the wreckage of my past. You know, one of the issues I think that I had a hard time with early on, because I was a victim of a lot of severe trauma and abuse, was distinguishing, like putting that to the side and keeping the focus on me. All of that stuff happened and not, some of my reservations early on were, well, if you went through all the stuff I went through, you would have gotten high too. And, for some, maybe they can get clean and stay clean and it's not a big issue. That I'm not one of them. I never used to socially. I used to not feel the pain. And I used dramatically. And I know today still, after 33 years clean, that just for today, I am not willing to play Russian roulette with all of the gifts that God has given me today in my life. I am a mother of 3 amazing kids who've grown up around, people in recovery. A lot of our friends and family, the closest to us, all are in, committed to a new way of life and their spiritual and emotional well-being and journey. And I think that that's been really neat for all 3 of my kids to grow up that way. And it's been a huge blessing. There's one of my ones giving me a kiss. My baby. I also, speaking of motherhood, I remember being terrified. I was, got pregnant at 21. I had maybe 3.5 years clean, something like that. I was absolutely terrified to be a mom. I was afraid that I was so wounded and beyond repair that I was not capable of loving or knowing how to parent, or I was terrified. And, I'm really grateful for the friendships and, just connecting with other parents. And, it takes a tribe and it takes a village to raise our kids, just as it does to support one another in this journey of recovery. And I'm really grateful for all of our friends who, we all support one another in all areas of our life, including parenting. And I've never known the kind of love. And I think for me, God kind of put that opportunity to be a mother very early on in my life so that my heart could heal and that I could feel capable and know that I was capable of loving in that way, like I've never experienced before. And huge blessing. It's a huge blessing. And, these kids teach me so much. And I just feel so honored and humbled that God chose to be their mom. I have a beautiful life today. Life shows up, and I've had to learn how to deal with life on life's terms. Marriages, divorces. I am very amicable with both of my ex-husbands and the father of my kids, and both of them are also in recovery. And that's a really neat thing to continue to experience and encourage all of us and kind of blended family team that we have of supporting one another in our journey. I have a daughter who is also in recovery and coming up celebrating 2 years sober soon. I'm very proud of her, immensely proud of her. Sorry about that. That was a little alarm going off. There goes the disruption. I'm just so grateful, and there is hope. And for me, I just continue even today, take one moment at a time, and I don't use just for today. And I maintain a connection with others and try to do God's will for me in my life today. And I guess that's it. That's my testimony.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Tammy. I had a question.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that I've heard, and it is that if you don't deal with your trauma will deal with you. And that's where, a lot of addictions, a lot of suicidal ideations, a lot of self-harm issues come in at, is that, while, and I'm not going to say everyone, but I would say the large majority of folks that are in some sort of addiction have some sort of trauma in their childhood, and which kind of, for whatever reason, pushes and leads them down a road of abuse or addiction. And you certainly have gone through it at a very, very young age. for those specifically young girls out there that are watching, and or really anybody that has not really maybe admitted to themselves that they have a problem, there's too much shame and guilt involved in it, fear of being judged. With all your experience, what would you say to those folks that are watching this and kind of lost right now? What are some things that you would share with them?
I think for me, the biggest key is just be open. It took me a little bit of time to find the right therapist, for example, the right fit. It takes time to build trust. And for me, I just had to keep it really simple. I knew that I wanted to heal, and I knew that if I did not deal with those deeper wounds, and Maureen was really the one that shared that with me. Like, we got to go there. We got to go there, baby. We just got to go there. And if I'm willing to walk through that pain, instead of doing everything I've done to this point to numb it, to avoid it, to not feel it, like, look how that's turning out. It's not looking too good. And I was going to be close to death, had I continued on the path that I was. I have no doubt about that. So remaining open-minded, and it takes time. And I've just learned to be gentle with myself, be patient with the process, and stay open-minded.
And you shared something else that I can relate to, and that is when you started coming to the meetings, you felt an acceptance. You felt the love, you felt the acceptance. And for me, that's what it was for me. That's what I was always looking for. I was always looking for that unconditional love, regardless of the way I was, my personality, what I went through. There wasn't very much judgment. And, I think oftentimes that's really all that we need is, the therapy and all that. Yeah, we can do that, but it's connecting with people who are loving us in spite of ourselves, and that's
right. And the value is that our stories are very similar.
Right.
They may be a bit different, but that pain is the same.
You're
connecting and
lagging.
watching somebody who may be down, here, let me move this way. Is that better?
There you go. Yeah. You were going in slow motion for a period of time.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Well, you gotta love internet connection here. It's a little spotty where I'm at today. We're enjoying a little Florida sun at a friend's pool. Social distancing, Florida style.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever.
But yeah, that connection is we're loving it. Very grateful for that too. But yeah, I mean, that connection with others and who are committed to the same path for me. And, Maureen was that first person. That was huge. That was a huge game changer in my being open to just kind of hanging in there long enough to see what the whole thing was all about. Really.
Right. Well, excellent testimony. Thank you so much again for sharing, having the courage, being transparent. Again, our prayer is that folks will be watching this, and how often it is when we'll sit in a group in a meeting somewhere and somebody will share their story, and we'll say, how do they know my story? They don't even know me, and they're sharing my story, and there's a commonality that we have. So, for all the folks that are watching that can relate to your story in some way, again, you're not alone. And there is hope. There is definitely hope. We do recover. It doesn't matter what your addiction is, whether it's drugs, alcohol, food, work, porn. They're all the same in that they take us away from who we actually are, who we were created to be. So it's very important for you to reach out and connect with people who can understand you without judging you. So again, Tammy, thank you so much for sharing this down in sunny Florida, where the temperatures are warm. unlike up here.
91
and-
degrees today.
Oh, great, great. Thank you. Okay. And on that note, we'll say goodbye. Thank you, Tammy.
Love you, brother. Thank
All right,
you.
love you. Peace. See ya.
Bye.